Friends, now we will be moving, having another regulatory perspective of how the board really works. So we are having with us Mr. Pradeep Ramakrishnan. You must be, you may not be seeing him, but you may be, certainly, listening to us. Will be reading his circulars, all his circulars that have been issued from SEBI by him. I'm pleased to welcome Mr. Pradeep Ramakrishnan. Mr. Pradeep.
Yeah, hi. Able
to
hear me?
Hi. Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you. Welcome on board to this webinar on board effectiveness, contribution of the role of Secretarial Department. Before I hand over to Mr. Pradeep Ramakrishnan, I'll just a brief introduction. All of you know about him, but Mr. Pradeep Ramakrishnan is working with SEBI for the last 18 years and has extensive experience in regulation and supervision of securities markets, especially in listing and compliance. He is currently the general manager at SEBI. Prior to SEBI, he was a fellow company secretary at Kothari Petrochemicals Limited, and very important thing, he was part of that two important committees which led the code for corporate governance in India. One is Mr. Narayan Murthy committee in 2003 and the Kotak committee in 2017. So now I hand over this deliberation to Mr. Pradeep Ramakrishnan. Pradeep, it is over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Krishna. Thanks for a very gracious introduction. It's very kind of you. So I know that I have a lot of time restrictions, so I'm going to keep it to a very, just a 10-minute talk. So, and I'm also going to skip a lot of introduction and other things.
No, time is not a constraint. No problem.
Yeah, no, I'll see, because I think
okay.
I also have another meeting lined up. That's why. So, I am a company secretary, and I was a company secretary of a listed entity. And I was the company secretary of a listed entity when the corporate governance norms were also introduced. So I remember speaking to my board at that point in time, trying to make a presentation on what exactly clause 49 stood for. So at that point in time, we were sort of working around the law, at the point in time, because it was new. Everything was new to us, and the concept of governance was first introduced in the February 21, 2000 circular. But over a period of time, 2 decades have elapsed since that time, and a lot of water has flowed down the river. And today, a lot of talk is about board effectiveness, board evaluation. This is a very pertinent topic which has been organized by NISM today. And I'm very happy to speak about the board effectiveness. So without delaying much, I would like to give you 2 or 3 examples because of paucity of time, and probably say that where the company secretaries can probably get into it. See, a couple of years back, there were some instances which resulted in one of those big companies, jewelry companies, going bust, and there was some fraud. So in that case, what the company secretary did at that point in time was, so that person was not able to get much information from the board. So that person on her own decided to give some information to the stock exchange. Those things are still there on the website. So this is an example of the company secretary going beyond what exactly is laid on under the LODR, and not only, but as far as rules are concerned, but as far as principles are concerned, if you see, the person has ensured that the governance is ensured, the spirit behind the principles has been adhered to. Now, last 2 years, we have seen some really bad instances where a couple of cases where SEBI has passed orders. Recently, we have issued probably, if you see, for the first time, we have warned the boards, a couple of cases which happened. In one of the cases, there were issues as far as repayment of some loans was concerned. Now, the talk is as to what can a company secretary do, because a large part of the discussion will always be like, see, I am a company secretary, I'm supposed to ensure that Companies Act is adhered to, securities contracts laws and SEBI Act, everything is adhered to. What more can I do? I have to file something on this date, whatever has come. But let us also keep in mind that today the concept of the role of a company secretary has changed. So when we are talking about board effectiveness, we are also talking about what a company secretary can also do to contribute to board effectiveness. So in this case which I was talking about, there was a commitment which was given by the board that they have to go for some repayment of some loan, and that a loan was advanced to a subsidiary to to get some asset or to invest in some asset. But what happened was, over a period of time, this was not happening, but then they kept on extending the tenure. Now, what can a company secretary do in this case? So I would perhaps advise that once on Regulation 30 has come into force, Regulation 30 gives out all the material information that has to be disclosed. But in this particular case, except probably for disclosing a couple of things under Regulation 30, there could be a possibility where a company secretary can exhort the board that, see, look, you have given a commitment, right? See, when you're given a commitment, you're supposed to, adhere to it and probably go for a disclosure as to why you are not able to do it. But in this case, it just happened whereby the board was just extending the tenure without any specific reason. We saw there is merit in extending, and we have extended it. Now, that is not an answer which a shareholder expects, which other board members also. I mean, so the board is actually taking, this onus of this decision on itself without giving a reason for the decision. Now, a company secretary should also act as an advisor to the board. Like, you can always put your hand up and say that, see, because when we say a company secretary is supposed to record minutes, the company, because I have attended board meetings, some before the whole the gamut of governance related issues that are cropped in today. So at that point in time, what we used to do was we looked at the form of conducting a meeting. You ensure that minutes are recorded, you ensure there is no unpublished price sensitive information, you ensure that all the arrangements are in place, audio, video, everything is there. Now, these are all ministerial things which even secretarial staff can do. So what a company secretary can do, company secretary has to go above this, have to also ensure, because we at ICSI, the ICSI says that company secretaries are governance professionals. They are not professionals. They are not just people who are going to acquire a certificate from the institute to practice as company secretaries or be employed as company secretaries, but they are governance professionals. So governance professionals have to ensure that governance, is being practiced in spirit. So what you can do, you have to advise the board. You have to put your hand up and say that, no, this is not done. So you can't do this. And there was one case which recently where there was one independent company appointed a director. Two directors are appointed, in which case, again, we have issued a warning. Two directors are appointed by the board, were nominated by the board, and then subsequently the shareholders have rejected the appointment. And within 1 or 2 days of the appointment being rejected, again the person has come onto the board by the board, come onto the board has reappointed it, subject to shareholders' resolution. And the shareholders have not met for a period of almost a year. Now the people are on the board. Now, as a company secretary, if I was a company secretary, what I should do is that after probably a month, we should say, see, we have to convene an EGM now. If you are not convening an EGM, then we'll have to send this person out. Let the person go out, and then whenever you feel like convening EGM, you can always nominate, because this person can always be nominated by the board. There is no restriction that in case this person has been rejected, you can't nominate, because today the powers are always there. In fact, now this has led the regulator to even think about probably, probably if I was a regulator, then I will probably also think about what can I do to ensure that such things are not. Should we stop the reappointments of rejected candidates in the first place? No, I would be constrained to think that way, because what happens, governance happens in letter, whereby you say, oh, the company side does not have any restrictions, the HODR does not have any restrictions, but we all know that the shareholders have taken a call to reject. If shareholders have taken a call to reject, there are certain parameters on the basis of which they are rejecting. You are putting the candidature again. When you are putting up the candidature again, then there are certain justifications you are giving. That, okay, probably we overlooked this, or probably you didn't see certain things. We would like to put up for approval again. So when you are doing that, at least the minimum which you need to do is that ensure that the things are taken on time. The other issue which I would also like, because I'll just take 2 more minutes, is also on the question of reclassification of shareholders, where here also we find company secretaries can play a major role by ensuring that, of course, now, we have come out with the amendment to the LODR after a lot of detailed consultation. There also you can ensure that when the shareholding pattern is disclosed. See, I want the regulators want the company secretaries to function as a standalone professional. When you have a chartered accountant who is a CFO of a company, that CFO is supposed to give a certification. The CFO, while giving a certification, takes an independent view of so many things, including true and fair, going concern, other things, and the company has to listen to the person, because you are employed by the company as a professional. How different is a company secretary? The company secretary is also the same. The company secretary is also a professional who has been employed. So when the company secretary has been employed, and the person has to ensure the compliance of rules, the regulations in letter and spirit, which is why if you see the import, if you look at the orders which SEBI has recently passed, whether it is warning, censure, caution, adjudication orders, or even 11B orders, if you see each of these orders, principles have been quoted by SEBI. Then principles, why? If you look at the principles are very wide-ranging. They don't give, they don't restrict the regulator. Because if I say that the board has to be given information in spirit, so which means that the board has to be given all information that is asked for by the board. Apart from that, you also have to ensure that the board is given information which you know that they have not got. Okay, which is the reason why there was one recommendation in the Quota Committee also that we have to give training in X amount of time, etc. We thought that will be a little too granular because and I believe the regulator also should not get into too much of micromanagement, which is what has always been SEBI's stance. Now, why do we not get into micromanagement? Because certain things are intrinsic to certain companies, to certain sectors, etc., which the company secretary can be best place to do it. So now this is going to contribute to board effectiveness, because once the company secretary says, okay, these things have to be complied with in spirit, the board has to necessarily look at risk management. They have to necessarily look at strategy. They have to necessarily look at certain other, the provisions of the LODR, or even otherwise as a board, because the board is the trustee of the shareholders. All the directors are supposed to be people who are going to keep who are supposed to keep the shareholders' interests paramount in their mind. So now I believe it's 10 minutes because I don't want to take, because I've been also told that because there's not much time. So I will always meet you, on another day, because I think this is a topic which we can talk well, and I believe the speakers before me have taken a lot of explaining. They have given a lot of explaining to the audience. So I would like to stop here. I will always be available for queries. Thank you.
Thank you, Pradeep, for wonderfully highlighting that the transformation in the role of a company secretary from just a company secretary to a governance professional, and also the being an advisor to the board. And you also dealt upon the how reclassification of shareholders has to be dealt with. And moreover, the very important point, actually, the regulator does not want to micromanage things, but to expect companies to comply with principle. Thank you so much for your sharing your wonderful insights. Now we would definitely will be having you in one more upcoming webinar to highlight more on these points. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. Now, friends, we are moving to another important session, actually, a director perspective of how the expectations from the secretarial department. Now, I welcome on board Ms. Rama Bijapurkar. Ma'am, good afternoon to you. Welcome to the seminar. Good afternoon, ma'am. Before I hand over the session to ma'am, a small introduction. All of you must be knowing, but a small introduction about ma'am. Ma'am, Ms. Rama Bijapurkar is an independent management consultant in the area of business and market strategy, and she is also a professor of management practice in IIM Ahmedabad. She is the most experienced independent directors with nearly 10 years of experience on the boards of leading Indian companies like Axis Bank, Infosys, BPCL, Godrej, Consumers, Arvind Mills, and much more companies. And currently, ma'am is serving on the boards of ICICI Bank, Cummins India, Mahindra Finance, Nestle India, VST Industries. And she has been serving, she served on the governing councils of public and non-profit making institutions like IIM Ahmedabad, National Payment Corporation of India, etc. Ma'am she's having a very dominant voice in media and in public forums on her work. Actually, all of you must be listening to ma'am in various forums. Ma'am, the session is over to you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, friends. I will also keep to time. I think this has been, I want to thank NISM, Krishnamurthy ji, Dr. Narasimhan for inviting me here, because I think it's already been a huge learning experience. I've had the privilege of working with Mr. Chittale on the Banking Codes and Standards Governing Council for almost 8 years. And when Parvati Sam's first time company secretaryship and my first time serious independent directorship coincided on the Infosys board. So it's good to exchange notes again.
Very nice, ma'am.
I think there is a lot of similarity, even in words, phrases, thoughts that people have used before me, that I'm about to use. And I was thinking, is this similarity groupthink, or is it just that the need is so universal that everyone is feeling it the same way? It is probably a universal need, because honestly, I don't think I've certainly not thought that much about company secretaries. In fact, I took tuition from secretaries of all the boards that I'm on, saying, tell me, how do you think about your role? Tell me what you think you can do to make boards more effective. And I was surprised with myself that I had not actually done this before. So I thank NISM for bringing this to my notice, and I will urge more of my other directors to actually have these conversations. I think, as everyone has pointed out, the company secretary's role has certainly got far more onerous, far more responsible, so I won't go into that. But I also want to tell you that the board responsibility has become more onerous over the years. I feel it. I mean, earlier when people abroad used to ask us how many boards are we on, and we'd say 5, 6, 7, and what else do you do? And you say, I do my consulting, I do this, I do that, or somebody would say, I'm CEO of a company and I'm on X number of boards. They used to ask us, how on earth do you manage so many boards? If you ever went for an interview on an overseas board, they would say, well, we don't think you can manage more than 1 or 2. So in those days, and I'm really talking about 20 years ago maybe, I used to wonder what's the fuss all about. But of late, I know exactly what they mean, more so because in India, actually, we have very, very few boards where there is no management active shareholder. I'm going to use that word. The promoter word always confuses me. So usually there's a management active shareholder. Boards tend to think कि चलो वो देख लेगा, उसका पैसा है, you know, we're here to advise on the sidelines to protect exceptionally the small shareholders if the dominant shareholder is not behaving badly, is not behaving well. But by and large, you know, the role was actually a lot simpler. There weren't too many. If you actually count on your fingers and think about it, how many boards are there where there is no management active shareholder, where the management reports to the board and the board is charged with keeping the company? I feel that I've been on a few of them, and I feel that I honestly feel the extent of the fiduciary responsibility where I say, oh my God, if we inherited this, then what are we leaving behind 10 years later? Are we leaving as good behind? Are we doing it better? Are we framing the company to live for the future? So I think and I think you will also notice that in situations where we've not had management active shareholders, where the board has been completely in charge, I'm not sure we've done very well. In fact, I don't think I need to spell it out. I think you can all make a list for yourselves, IT companies, NBFC companies, banks, many more. I think we've not been able to do that. So it's fashionable for many people to say, oh, you see what happened when there's a board where nobody's in charge, where it's widely held shareholding, there's no way the board can govern the company. I think it's always good to have a management active shareholder. But I say to myself that how is it that we in India haven't yet learned to run a class without a class monitor? I've seen situations where the board is empowered to make decisions and timely decisions, and they either look to the government or they look to the regulator to make that decision, not to ratify the decision. So I think we need some major sadhana, and I think we are getting at it. I think we have a handful of companies now, but there will be more and more companies as more and more capital comes into companies where the shareholding, we will not have the dominant active, management active shareholder who will be the MIBAP for the board. Good, bad, and different. So I think we need serious sadhana to be able to run a board without a class monitor, or to elect our own class monitor and to adhere to best practice. And I think even the so-called most sophisticated boards are far from actually being independent in that sense, independently being able to do the job that they are charged to do. And I think boards themselves are struggling today with their understanding of their roles. Every time we have board sessions and we ask people, what is your role? I mean, I sometimes find myself wondering, are we a board of consultants? Are we a board of advisors? Or are we a board of directors? We're not a BOC, we're a BOD. A lot of people, company secretaries included, say, oh, he's the chairman of the company. But he or she is chairman of the board of the company, not chairman of the company. And I think a little phrase like that tells us a lot about how we tend to view roles and how we tend to view people and how we tend to view this rather delicate balance of responsibility and power. Also, I think boards are a little bit confused about their roles, where assisting and helping management you have to realize that you can't be on the buy side and the sell side. You can't cook the meal and be the judge at the chef contest, right? You have to keep, plus there are a whole lot of other dynamics that go a little bit crazy. So boards are struggling with their own roles. Regulators also are definitely evolving. I think they are evolving in experience, and they're evolving, and it is both our pain and our gain that they are evolving to keep up with the times and give us a good regulatory environment. Result of this, I think a good company secretary is absolutely essential to help us through this with an appropriate understanding of her or his role, a hawk's eye and a duty of care, and they can energize and not just energize, just navigate the board on this journey that we have to make this transition, and we have to make it very quickly. We've had one round of round one of boards completely in charge has not been terrific. I think round two has got to be a lot better. Dr. Narasimhan talks about the spinal cord. I love that analogy. In fact, we often joke and say that independent directors have brain, but what they need is spine. And if I ever write a book on corporate governance, I'm going to title it Brain Connected to Spine. But yesterday I was thinking, really, the analogy that came to my mind is that a good CS is like the operating system of a computer, right? So it is in the background, it needs updating all the time. It is powerful because the more powerful the operating system, the stronger will be the things you can do with it, and the stronger will be the apps that you can ride on it. So I think the operating system is what one looks forward to. And like the operating system, I'm not sure many of us take a lot of notice about the roles. We certainly take notice of the company secretary a lot, but do we use the company secretary to the fullest extent that we should is, I think, something that going forward, when my colleagues and I get together, I think we should think about. So to my mind, there are three areas, three buckets of areas where I think the CS can contribute to the effectiveness of the board. One is, of course, the whole business of regulatory and compliance. And while people tend to dismiss it, I call it that which keeps me out of jail. So I think that's a very, very important thing. And let's talk about that. The second, which I want to talk about, is about the procedures and the processes by which we work as a board, where I think everybody before me has also talked about it. So there are things that we can do there in order to make boards way more effective. And the last one, which has also been talked about, which I really want to talk about, is the ethical dimensions and the role, as I think Parvati also used the phrase conscience keeper. So coming to the first bucket, which is the regulatories and the compliances and so on, someone else has talked about it as well. I think I would like to understand the spirit and the logic behind the guidelines. So, sir, ma'am, these are the new guidelines, this is what it is. And then sometimes I think any board that does not do enough teasing or bashing of the regulator in good faith and good spirit with humor probably is telling lies when they say we don't do it. So, of course, we all do it. But I think often understanding the spirit and logic when it has been explained to us, I think has been hugely useful so that we manage to stay within the spirit of what is suggested. I always say that regulators and law framers and bureaucrats have what I call an alternate logic. We don't see the logic from our side, but when you actually sit down and look at the alternate logic, it is very compelling logic indeed. So I think this whole, and as you know, this whole regulation laws business has got more and more complicated over time. So Adi Shankara said that of the Guru. He said, Ananta Samsara Samudra Tara. He's the navigator across this huge ocean. And I think the ocean of regulation, law, compliance, I think what we need is a boatman, a navigator who can get us across this through this. And I think that is the definition of the role and the spirit of certainly what I would like to see. And I would like to see more of. The second bucket is the bucket of working procedures, processes, whatever you choose to call it, right? So whenever we do board evaluations and we say, oh, how's the board doing? We say, does it address the right issues? Does it address it in a timely fashion? Do we spend enough time on, whenever we have independent director meetings, we're always complaining that we don't have enough time for the right issues. There are always some issues that always show up last, that always end up with shortage of time. And I keep wondering, what does it take in order to flip it? I mean, why don't we do better on that? And do we have all the information that we actually need? I think people have talked about that, but that is extremely important to me, because we have a lot of other things to do as well. So when we come to a board, it's not like we're bringing a lot of baggage. I have a little black diary for every board where I write what I need to write and imagine, and I carry that over years. Sometimes management teams say that they will have a auction for that diary, because I remember what was said 4 years ago in terms of numbers. But I think that to be able to manage that period of time that we are there, and to manage our priorities through process, is really what I would really look to a CS to absolutely do. So I think I'm saying that there should be a design and suggestion process, a nudge, maybe a push, that the board adopt ways to make time more effective. And this is not saying let's increase days by 3. I think there has to be a design element to it. Is it that if we did one conference call in the middle of, or in the middle of 2 board meetings for the audit committee, would we be able to do this quicker? Is it about designing things that can be off the board schedule? And now I think we have the advantage, because we are a little bit licked of the habit of having to physically meet for everything. But I think how to allot time, how to make pre-reads useful. I understand that it is the management that does decide a lot of pre-reads, but I think feedback on why the pre-reads are difficult, why they're easy, what more we need to see, how to make documents which have adequate information. For example, I know on some boards that over time, you can always tell what's the data that's missing, because we always ask for that data, and that data is always not coming. Now, it has to sit on somebody's radar, right? This institutional memory of how every board meeting, the reason, the stuff that doesn't come to us that should come to us, or the stuff that comes to us that everybody's complaining about. So I think being the repository of all the bouquets and the brickbats of the struggles that we're having, and to be able to design ways to make it better, is what I've seen good CSs do, and that's what I would like CSs to do more of. Stay in touch with us, see what we struggle with, be the conduit to make it happen. So for example, the lead independent director is supposed to be the conduit between the management and the board, and so on. Similarly, I think between the management and the board, the company secretary is the conduit. Similarly, I think people have talked about helping new directors to settle in and integrate. It could be something as simple as a list of abbreviations. When you're the new kid on the block, it is terrifying. Learning to belong requires you to say something, but then you don't know whether that's already been discussed. You don't understand. The orientations are 500 PowerPoint slides, at the end of which you don't want to be at the orientation. They don't want to be at the orientation. So, I mean, is there ways by which it can be made more meaningful? My business, I call it people centricity. So board member centricity from the CS would really make things happen. I think this is the time also when a lot of us are moving to digital systems. I don't just mean virtual meetings. I mean a lot of us have gone to paperless boards. There's lots of board software that's floating around. Some software is terrifying because they've been created by techies, and it has everything you ever wanted to know and never wanted to know. I think as company secretary, you have to figure out what is an appropriate web portal for the board, for this board, not for any board, but given the dynamic of this board, given the way this board functions, what's the functionality that makes sense? What works on one board doesn't work on the other board. So I think that's the sort of territory. I hope I have sort of captured the spirit of what it is that we need in terms of being far more effective. So I think design thinking is the key word I want to leave behind. Finger on the pulse, design thinking, the memory that continues across board meetings of what went right and what went wrong. I think that's really that bucket. And now coming to the last bucket, I think both Amarjit and Pradeep have spoken about it as well. I think there is this whole bucket of ethics, integrity, the conscience keeper. The trouble with most seminars, and I have stopped going to corporate governance seminars, I was pleasantly surprised by the changes in this one, is that we discuss a lot of ritual. We don't discuss the religion. We discuss the ritual of how audit committee should meet, how many pages the minutes should be, how often we should do this. And I think that none of these are important. These are the table stakes. You put them down, you play teen patti. You don't put them down, you don't play teen patti. But none of them really guide me when I'm in trouble. In an ideal world, we don't need it. But I've had over 100 years of listed board experience. Seen a lot of things that can go wrong, a lot of things that I feel have gone wrong that others feel haven't gone wrong. So it's a mess. It's actually a messy world. It's not a very neat world. But let's face it, so much goes on at boards, right? I think anybody who denies that board games happen on boards is not really very experienced in it. I'm not saying it happens all the time, but there are times when it does happen. There are boards happen at all. There are boards where it happens all the time. Some may be personality stakes, some may be genuine divergences of opinion. There are some boards where by the nature of the business, the entity, the situation, you have multiple stakeholders and multiple camps who just don't see eye to eye. And I think we have many situations. I always say of the chairman of the board that you need to be like a good obstetrician. It's not like women haven't had babies in the field all the time. But when the umbilical cord is around your neck, that's when you need the skill of an obstetrician to help save the day. Similarly, I think when things get hard, difficult, ugly, complicated, I think that's when we really need the CS to not just navigate us, but to be the anchor or the pivot around which we can actually function. So the CS to me is a neutral party. So the question of where is the loyalty, I think is important. I think someone before me said that the loyalty is to the institution. I don't think it is loyalty to the chairman. I don't think it is loyalty to the management. I think it is nor is it loyalty to the regulator. I think it is loyalty to the institution. One of the areas that people have discussed a lot is minutes. All I will add to that is how do you minute dissent? How do you capture dissent? I find that a lot of boards are clubby. They want to report unanimity, but often the value of minutes is to capture dissent. And so how do you capture dissent, or how do you make sure that the minutes are not partisan? How do they reflect fairly what it is? Sometimes the technicalities of what is discussed I found are beyond the CS, for example, or beyond many board members actually. If it's the details of IT system A versus IT system B, or if it's a business strategy where the management is continuously trying to move it to a place of consensus, it's preferable to leave it gray on both sides, so then nobody's very clear what happens. So in situations like that, I think what CSs need to do is to seek clarity, whichever way they seek the clarity, and to make sure that the minutes are absolutely fair. This is easier said than done. I've had many CSs tell me the chairman is the prerogative to finalize the minutes. Yes, the chairman has the prerogative to finalize the minutes of the chairperson, but what do you do in terms of making sure that at least the drafting of the minutes is free and fair, so that the other person has to do a sin of commission rather than a sin of omission or default if any changing and doctoring has got to be done. So non-partisan drafting, I think, is certainly what I would say on the minutes. Very often also what looks like a simple process decision is actually related to integrity and ethical discussions at boards. So when you steamroll a process, I used to have a chairman who would say exactly 1 hour for an audit committee. At 59 minutes, he would come, look at his watch and say, I say, folks, I think we need more efficiency here. Please conclude the meeting and get to the next one. I think the CS can design better systems whereby it caters both to the chairman's need to have a bell going off at the time of the end meeting, as well as time required for the meeting to be discussed. I think it is in terms of what kind of topics get on the agenda. It is about how we actually make sure that people who want their topics discussed actually get them discussed with adequate time. Asymmetry of information is a really big deal. I know CSs and chairmen who discuss things, and I think at the end of the day, the board needs to know more. I think there are committees that discuss things, and committee discussions are shoved into 500-page minutes so that you can never figure out what it is. So instead of saying, hey, spend more time and find out what's right or what's wrong, I think I would say it is the CS's business to make sure there is no asymmetry of information at the board, between board and shareholders, in the gray area where we know management is meeting large investors all the time. So I think guidelines and antennae and conscious keepers has got to be what the CS does. So I'm just going to end with 3 things from my experience. One is that I think a lot of things that make our corporate governance less than where we would like it to be are what I call sins of omission. They're not sins of commission. I always say that clubby capitalism is sins of omission, crony capitalism is sins of commission. I don't think we have, many of us are crony capitalists, but I think many of us are clubby. So I think there are always sins of omission because someone doesn't really want to get into the middle of this, the obligation to dissent. And I think that is really what you have to watch out for. It is also my experience that when you raise the bar of the standard of ethic, integrity, process, whatever you may choose as a metric in the boardroom, I think by and large, most people actually rise to it. So when somebody doesn't raise the bar, the system settles into a low equilibrium system. I think the CS can energize all to raise the bar so that then most people come up to meeting the bar. That I think is the first point I want to make. The second takeaway I want to make is that we do a lot of board assessments. Maybe you should also have and design an instrument which is an assessment for how the board is seeing the role of the CS and the evaluation or assessment of the CS. So if you can design a specific evaluation questionnaire, I would certainly benefit much more from it, as I suspect will you as well. And the third is that just as we independent directors have a support group and many support groups where we can actually discuss case studies in a Chatham House rules fashion, I found that that is extremely helpful because you will find that many other people have the similar issues. Many other people find solutions to similar issues and we can all learn. So I'm sure you have support groups, but if you can form more support groups of CSs, I think best practice transfers will happen much more. Not just in seminars like this, which are extremely valuable, but in much smaller groups where difficulties can be discussed and frustrations can be voiced, and how do you actually make that happen can be discussed. So that's really what I want to say, and I hope this has been useful. I think all we can do is share, and I think the more we share, we all then process what is shared inside our heads and come up with our own ways forward. So thank you for giving me the privilege of sharing.
Thank you, ma'am. Thanks a lot for sharing your wonderful insights. We really look forward to your book, The Brain Connected to the Spine, definitely. And really, you have thrown wonderful insights, explaining the role of the responsibility of board, which has gone tremendously over a period of time, and also the expectations from the Secretarial Department, especially the quoting from Adi Shankaracharya that Secretarial Department should help you in navigating over the processes and compliances. And more importantly, the spirit and logic behind each and every regulation, more information, and the Secretarial Department should serve as a conduit. And finally, yes, Secretarial Department should go digital, absolutely, and digital sharing and caring more about the board. So that's very, very important point. Thank you so much. Really, you brought your 100 years of experience as board of director onto the table. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. We are really privileged to have you on this session. Thank you so much, ma'am.